Hello, I'm Sopon Soren, director of San Francisco's Berlin and Beyond Film Festival. Welcome to Berlin and Beyond in Focus, our first ever virtual film festival and this very special panel, National Cinema in the Age of Netflix. Hello, I'm Sopon Soren, director of San Francisco's This festival is made possible with the presenting sponsorship of the Goethe Institute San Francisco, our German Cultural Center, and grants for the arts. I want to mention that the Goethe Institutes around the world are active ambassadors of German film worldwide. Collectively, more than 5 million viewers each year in over 80 countries, which is roughly 2,500 film screenings taking place each year at 136 institutes, from the classic silent films to the latest German box office hits. And of course, our Berlin and Beyond Film Festival is proud to be part of this heritage, to be part of this endeavor, and to be part of the global contemporary German cinema experience. We are honored today to be in the presence as well as to be in the presence of as well of ambassadors and scholars of German film. This special panel marks the release of the German Cinema book, second edition, published by the British Film Institute in April 2020. We are honored to have in this special panel film scholars, particularly with their vast knowledge of the diverse and complex world of German cinema. The panelists, as Professor Göktürk had written in the program description, will take us on a vivid journey on German cinema's transnational connections and acts of diversity, counter cinema and feminist interventions, and a rediscovery of East German cinema as the other German cinema. Our moderator is Professor Jamie Fisher. He teaches at UC Davis as Professor of German and Cinema and Digital Media, as well as the director of the UC Davis Humanities Institute. He is the author of Treme, Christian Petzold, and Disciplining German Youth at Re-Education and Reconstruction After the Second World War. He has also been editor or co-editor of 7 volumes, including The Berlin School and Its Global Context, A Transnational Art Cinema, Generic Histories of German Cinema, Genre and Its Deviations, and Critical Theory, Current State and Future Prospects. His current book project analyzes war films in Germany from 1914 to 1961. So we are very honored as well to be with all of you, with all of these film scholars again. And Jamie, take it away. Thank you so much, everyone, for being with us at our free virtual film festival and this special panel. Vielen Dank.
Thank you, Sopan. Thanks for that kind introduction and for the invitation to be here and for arranging this special event in general. And I want to express my gratitude to you in general for your reaching out to us local universities and putting up with us in this Berlin and Beyond Festival. I think it's been a great collaboration over the years. Special thanks too to Denise Gertturk for overseeing the organization of today's session. So just briefly, I'll be the moderator today, and our format will be a few very brief remarks by me about this wonderful second edition of the German Cinema book from the BFI, and then roughly 10-minute presentations by our panel of eminent scholars, contributors, including Denise Gertturk of UC Berkeley, Claudia Sandberg of University of Melbourne, Erica Carter of King's College London, and then a response by the renowned film critic Jay Hoberman. So I just want to say a few words before we get to the presentations about this occasion of the publication of the second edition of the German Cinema book. Besides the esteemed company here assembled, I'm particularly delighted to be here today because I think its publication marks an impressive, even monumental achievement in our field. I had the good fortune to be a reader on the manuscript publication, and even though it weighs in at some, I think, 500-600 pages, which was a gargantuan assignment as a reader, I was happy to do it because of the rarity it represents for the field. I think I would make 2 points about why I think it is so rare as a publication in our field. One is, as a second edition, it really is a substantive updating and evolution of the first edition. I think many second editions are really content just to add an introduction or an afterword. But in this book, there's really a reconceptualization of German cinema that's truly impressive, I think. There's a really fundamental rethinking of the approach to German cinema. In a way, as we'll soon hear from our panelists, it's a powerful argument for where the field has been, where it is now, and where it's going. Secondly, it is rare, I think, and again, even unique to see this huge number of top scholars. I think some over 40 scholars working in these very different areas and not really summarizing the direction of scholarship, but actually pushing research forward in an amazing number of different directions. And you know, the various essays reconceptualize German cinema, as we'll hear about from our panelists, in terms of what is national cinema in the age of transnationalism. They engage very deeply with the notion of genre in German cinema, and pay renewed attention, I think, to things like stardom. Our order will be that Professor Gurtuk will go first, and she'll present, and then I'll introduce each speaker in order. So Professor Denise Gurtuk teaches at the University of California, Berkeley. Her research in cinema, media, and culture focuses on moving images, multilingual literature, and theories of migration in the global horizon. Her book, Framing Migration, 7 Takes on Movement and Borders, is forthcoming. She's also the co-founder of the Multicultural Germany Project and the concept coordinator of the electronic journal Transit.
Okay. Yeah. Hello, everyone. Let me start by congratulating Berlin and Beyond, our local Bay Area German Film Festival, on its upcoming 25th anniversary. I think it's next year, but you know, it's upcoming. And this event is in preparation. So usually held at the legendary Castro Theater in San Francisco, this year's autumn showcase event, Berlin and Beyond in Focus, is held entirely online, as you've already heard, virtual free film festival due to pandemic restrictions. Please make sure to check out the selection of German language films, which are streaming for free. Only accessible if your IP address is in California. Yes, place still does matter. And the World Wide Web is parceled into domains. But let's look at the bright side. The surge of video communication that we've experienced over the past year has made it possible to imagine this conversation across 3 continents and multiple time zones. I would like to extend warm thanks to Sofwan Sorn and his team, Jethro and Yancy, who are behind the scenes, for all the hard work that has gone into putting on this show and their enthusiastic support for our panel. So our lives revolve around screens these days, which is why Netflix appears in this panel's title. And this is where I start sharing my screen. Give me a second. I think it works. Netflix. And Netflix was founded in 1997 as a startup online DVD rental store, and then started streaming on-demand video in 2007, and shifted to content production in 2011. And at a well-remembered keynote address at the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas in 2016, Reed Hastings, the founder of Netflix, emphasized that Netflix was the first to put out all episodes at once, start the binge era, and give viewers complete control. I can't help wondering, of course, how complete our control really is. So Netflix everywhere. So the co-CEO and chief content officer of Netflix, Ted Sarandos, at the same keynote address, spoke about the global footprint of Netflix. And since we were not able to get anyone from Netflix to join this panel, we have a very brief clip from that keynote address to give you an impression. Can we have the clip, please?
Great stories come from everywhere. We're working with local storytellers right now in Brazil, Cambodia, Canada, Colombia, France, Italy, Japan, Korea, Mexico, the UK, and the United States, and that list is only going to grow over time. We're making kids' cartoons, teen dramas, sci-fi thrillers, adult comedies, and historical epics. We're working in multiple language, and if we've seen through the success of our series Narcos, that can be successful across all territories, even when the original language is not English. We're in a unique position to bring the world's stories to the world's people. We have that luxury thanks to the internet. We can have content that appeals to a 5-year-old, a teen, or their grandparents, all living in the same household. Pilots, the fall season, summer repeats, live ratings, all of the constraints of linear television are falling away one by one. And just as we changed how TV series are distributed, we're offering to our members first-rate movies from stars and creators like Brad Pitt, Adam Sandler, Donnie Yen, Michelle Yeoh, Christopher Guest, Bong Joon-ho, Ricky Gervais, Judd Apatow, and Angelina Jolie. To be clear, we are not anti-theater. We're just pro-movies.
Okay, so you will have noticed that the example given here for the world conquering, Netflix conquering the world is Narcos, and the 2015-17 show. But if we, my first impulse was to lament that the Mexico portrayed in Narcos is full of cliches. I quote, drug dealers and rapists. But we also ought to remember that Netflix distributed Alfonso Cuarón's beautiful award-winning film set in Mexico City, Roma, in 2019. So Sarandos actually emphasizes we are pro-movies. And while this keynote was being delivered at the Consumer Electronics Show, Netflix switched on in 130 new countries, including 130 new countries, including Turkey, among others. So you will also have noticed that there was no mention of Germany back in 2016. In the meantime, of course, Netflix has set up an office in Berlin and co-productions are on the rise. Netflix licensed the series by Babylon Berlin starting 2017 and still ongoing. A palimpsest of references to classic Weimar cinema. And also Netflix co-produced Dark, a 3-season presentation of Stranger Things and time travels occurring in a town near a nuclear power plant. So, and more is to come. So there can be no doubt that on-demand streaming has radically transformed not just viewers' engagement experience and engagement with television as a medium, but our very sense of place and time. And in this context, we have to ask ourselves whether national cinema is really obsolete in this age of global internet television. But then, aren't there also things that fall by the wayside in the global imaginary promoted by streaming platforms such as Netflix? Does the world still need books, courses, panels, and film festivals that focus on particular national cinemas? But also what exactly is cinema today if it is no longer watched publicly in the movie theater. So these are questions that were very much on our horizon already as we conceptualized the second edition of the German cinema book. And so, you know, and we envisage that this discussion will also address these questions, what we are doing by still perpetuating this category of German cinema. So we were aiming to promote the study of national cinema in a transnational and also intermedial horizon as a space of transit, negotiation, resistance, trading cliches, new viewing practices. And we wanted to also promote a focus on situated histories of moving image production, circulation, and reception, analysis of staging, framing, and enactment of national identities rather than just taking them for granted. And also a focus on what is not streaming, what is not readily available online, what requires research in archives. Of course, also co-productions by traveling filmmakers and new viewing practices which are on the move across multiple media. So the book then contains sections on genre, such as comedy, crime, war films, the popular cinema, stars from early cinemas, Asta Nielsen to Marlene Dietrich and Nina Hoss, who will be featured at this festival. Authorship, transatlantic careers of Ernst Lubitsch, Fritz Lang, or from the new German cinema, Fassbinder, Werner Herzog. Women filmmakers, Helke Sander, Ulrike Oettinger, Angela Schanalek, and Fatih Akın as global auteur. Then film production and circulation, the institutions and sites of cinema, from early cinema audiences to the film studios of UFA and in East Germany, DEFA, and film policy in the Third Reich, television, digital preservation and archives. In the theory section, there was a focus on writing about film, political cinema, queer cinema, and last but not least, the transnational connections, which presents chapters on colonialism, exile, German directors in mainstream Hollywood, such as Emmerich, Petersen, and their reception in Germany, Turkish-German traffic in cinema, and European transnational productions. The book would not exist without my co-editor, Erika Carter's tireless efforts. So thank you so much, Erika. And our fourth editor, Tim Bergfelder, could not participate today, but is with us in spirit. The German Cinema Book, or GCB, as we kept referring to it, was a complex project, including many illustrations, longer and shorter chapters, as well as 2-page spotlights on specific films, stars, or institutions. If I counted correctly, there were 53 contributors, and I cannot name all of them here. Several are with us today in the audience, joining from various locations around the globe, ranging from Groningen in the Netherlands to Bogota in Colombia. So here's a big shout out and thank you to all of you who contributed to this complex project. And I'd also like to say that Thomas Elsesser, one of our contributors, who wrote a chapter on Alexander Kluge, is no longer with us. He was a pioneer and trailblazer of film studies. He famously wrote about the new German cinema of the 1960s and 70s as a national cinema without a national audience. So here he is seen in a cinema discussing a film with another contributor in the background, Nick Baer. Yes, that was how we enjoyed movies once upon a time. In memoriam also Birol Ünel, who died this year. He was the co-star in Gegen die Wand, Head On, alongside Sibel Kekilli, who finds herself on the cover of our book. She was later also seen in Game of Thrones. Head On was the winner of the Golden Bear Award at the Berlin Film Festival in 2004, and it was a big breakthrough for a young and rebellious Turkish-German cinema. It's an ironic melodrama with musical interludes, pretty wild. And I'm showing the posters in German, English, and Turkish to illustrate that marketing pitches these films, these transnational films, differently to different audiences. The Turkish poster actually features two famous Turkish supporting actors, Meltem Cumbul and Güven Kıraç, also on the poster. So, and here's a picture of the sham wedding between Sibel and Cahit. Unlike Green Card, the Depardieu movie, this was not a wedding to gain immigration status, but to escape the constraints of family life. So the theater Ballhaus Nauninstraße in Berlin-Kreuzberg was onto something when they titled their festival commemorating 50 years of Turkish immigration to Germany, 1961 to 2011, Almancı 50 Jahre Scheinehe, Germanized 50 years of sham marriage. In my chapter in the transnational connections section of the German cinema book, I took the film retrospective presented at this festival as an occasion to reflect on the performance of assigned and assumed identities, opportunities, constraints, and enduring paternalism within a field of uneven representations. The opening film of Berlin and Beyond in Focus this year features yet again a story of finding true love in a sham marriage with unusual twists. Es gilt das gesprochene Wort, I was, I am, I will be, by İlker Çatak, starring Anne Ratte-Polle and Oğulcan Arman Uslu. I don't want to give away anything of the plot here, but let me just mention that the literal translation of the German title, The Spoken Word Counts, is a very fitting motto for the play on sound in this film. It is a ritualized formula used at the wedding ceremony, and wedding ceremonies are highly complex speech acts, official and personal at once. They lend themselves to an analysis of layered performances of authenticity, identity, and intention. Borders, passports, and mobility play an important role in these performances. In fact, it might be fruitful to think about the sham marriage as a paradigm for cross-cultural contact, and to follow Thomas Elsässer, double occupancy. Here is a clip from this film, which is not yet streaming on Netflix, but brought to you by Berlin and Beyond.
Eingetretene Änderungen seit der Anmeldung bis zur Heirat ist also nicht der Fall. Gut. Da Sie keine Trauansprache gewünscht haben, jetzt also die Frage an die Eheschließenden. Zunächst an den Ehemann, wenn Sie sich dafür bitte erheben würden. Wollen Sie, Herr Baran Özyakup, mit Ihrer hier anwesenden Verlobten Marion Bach die Ehe eingehen? Dann antworten Sie bitte mit Ja.
Ja.
Nun meine Frage auch an Sie, Marion Bach. Wollen auch Sie mit Herrn Baran Özyakup die Ehe eingehen? Dann antworten Sie bitte ebenfalls mit Ja.
Ja.
Es gilt das gesprochene Wort und damit stelle ich fest, dass Sie nunmehr Kraftgesetzes rechtmäßig verbundene Eheleute sind. Üblicherweise erfolgt jetzt zur Besiegelung des Ehekontraktes der Austausch der Ringe und eine entsprechende zwischenmenschliche Geste.
Yüzü takıp öpebiliriz.
Gut. Sehr gut.
I'm done actually, so over to Jamie. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Denise. Our next presenter is Claudia Sandberg, who is a film historian and filmmaker based at the University of Melbourne as a senior researcher and teaching fellow. Her research interests include migration and mobility in European and Latin American film, Cold War memory, and archives. She made the documentary Hidden Films, A Journey Between Exile and Memory in 2016 with Alejandro Ariel Velez. Her monograph, Peter Lilienthal, A Cinema of Exile and Resistance, will appear with Berghahn Books in 2021. Thanks, Lenny.
Thank you very much, Jamie. Thank you for this invitation. And I take my cue from Denise on following up on the digital in terms of East German cinema. And I'm sharing my screen. Can you see this? Thank you. So yes, I titled this The Personal and the Digital. Global audiences interested in East German history or the fall of the wall and its afterlife can certainly find a film on Netflix or Amazon Prime. There's a lot out there to this matter, such as Balloon by Bully Herbig, Gundermann by Andreas Dresen, The Omnipresent The Lives of Others. And among the many series, there is Deutschland 89, that is a German-American television series, a sequel to Deutschland 86 and Deutschland 83. And this was just launched in September 2020 to celebrate the 30th anniversary of the unification on Amazon Prime. And with the exception of Gundermann, perhaps, these are films that offer a glimpse into life of the GDR in a melancholic fashion, in a dramatized and serialized format. There's a lot of suspense, and they claim authenticity by the use of decor, locations, and historical documents. But what about DEFA films? The films made by the East German state company, production company, DEFA. DEFA film maybe could give us a kind of a more a different feel for East Germany in the present tense, to understand socialism as a political and economic system, as a lived experience, as an utopia. But in the catalog of these commercial platforms, they don't figure. Where are they? That's why maybe the other German cinema. So where can they be accessed? Certainly, digitalization has facilitated access to East German cinema and has also increased its visibility. There's, for example, a Canopy, an on-demand platform for public libraries and universities that has a good selection of DEFA films. There is the DEFA Library based at the University of Massachusetts with a large and growing number of films, a growing catalog of subtitled DEFA films serving the Anglo-American market. In Germany, there is the DEFA Foundation that took care of the DEFA film stock and is aligned with Progress Filmverleih, and Filmverleih houses documentaries, newsreels, feature films, many of which are digitized and can be accessed online. And then maybe there's also the Mitteldeutscher Rundfunk, the MDR, and the Rundfunk Berlin-Brandenburg, the RBB, located in the former territory of East Germany, that regularly feature DEFA films in its program. So there is a number of ways to access DEFA film in an on-demand way. This is just a kind of screenshot by the site Progress Filmverleih of their catalog. But apart from offering digital content, equally important are the activities that DEFA Library, the DEFA Foundation, and other cultural institutions such as the Goethe Institute or the Cinegraph offer to contextualize DEFA film. And there are screening events, there are retrospectives, there are film series, workshops, you name it, to promote engagement with DEFA film, but also to feature question and answer sessions, discussion with agents of DEFA film. With directors, with producers, with script writers, with actors, with film critics, with photographers. So these activities are important because they promote an understanding of East German film with regards to the experiences, the practices, and the memories of its cast and crews, so to say, right, of DEFA film. So we talk about Zeitzeugen and also we talk about a personal encounter with DEFA film. And this, of course, only has its limited time because these actors or agents of DEFA film are also aging because, after all, DEFA was dissolved in 1992. This is almost 30 years ago. And then, of course, there are archives that house a wealth of secondary resources and materials about DEFA. And I just want to name the Bundesarchiv Filmarchiv, the Kinemathek, the Akademie der Künste, das Deutsche Rundfunkarchiv in Potsdam, and the library of the Konrad Wolf University. A lot of the inventory is digitized, but there is so much more out there for which you have to go there, of course. And these materials cover everything on almost any DEFA films. There are just folders and folders of material, letter exchanges between Hauptverwaltung Film and the producers, scripts, materials as to the whole accounting, the wages of actors, the cost for some props. There are the Dramaturgen reporter, of course. There is newspaper clippings, film reviews that you can access in the library of the Konrad Wolf universities, and of course a lot of visual material as film stills and posters and whatnot. So this gives us an idea and a feel for East German cinema as a national cinema, yes, in its cultural, political dimension, but also as to the economics of filmmaking, the audiences, and the collaboration of East German film and DEFA with colleagues from Eastern Europe, but also with artists and colleagues from all over the world. Kind of that transnational dimension that has always been there with DEFA from the very beginning. And of course, I shouldn't forget, there has been kind of lately a lot of publications out there, and some just kind of recently, the last 2 years, some brilliant publications about DEFA film. As to collaborations with East Germany, directors, female directors of DEFA, gender and sexuality, Joris Evans, and with DEFA, working with DEFA. And of course, I should mention maybe at the end of my little presentation, Also that our volume, the German cinema book in the second edition has a number of chapters and contributions to the study of East German cinema. From the in the first section, Claudia Felmers and John Raundahlens studied as to Armin Müller-Stahl, Annie Ring's contribution on the last films made by DEFA. She's talking about die Architekten and Letztes aus der Daher in kind of getting lost in this transition period. There's my overview piece on DEFA. And of course, there's Barton Birks and Victoria Ritzel-Sheen's fantastic chapter on DEFA as an archives and the politics of memory and where research has been, where it's going, kind of sites of DEFA, East German film, and so on and so forth. And there are these spotlights that we had introduced as an addition this time, and there are spotlights on Winter Day, written by Martin Brady, Horst Klaus, on Jürgen Böttchers Jahrgang 45, and Irgendwo in Berlin, Gerhard Lamprecht's film, and Barton Birks' spotlight on Heiner Caro. So to sum this up, digital platforms, yes, give us access to a number and a growing selection of DEFA film materials, but there's always a challenge, and the challenge remains to get a grip on East German national cinema that is not guided by Western imaginations, memory, politics, and narratives, but to find it in its moment, in its alliances, and its kind of cross-general and cross-border alliances. And there is scholarship, there are discussions, there is personal communication, and the consultation of archival material are a key to achieve that. And of course, we hope with our volume to contribute to this endeavor and to this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Claudia. We're going to move on now to Erica Carter, who will give the last of the formal presentations. I just want to remind our audience that you can post questions in YouTube chat or on Facebook and Facebook Live, and they'll be kind of ported over to us here in Zoom. So Erica Carter is Professor of German and Film Studies at King's College London. She's an associate member of the Cinepoetic Center for Advanced Film Studies in Berlin and founding chair of the UK German Screen Studies Network. The author of many books, the titles are on the Berlin and Beyond website. She's currently researching colonial cinema and the racial distribution of the sensible for a forthcoming Cinepoetics volume entitled Mapping the Sensible, Distribution, Inscription, and Cinematic Thinking. Erica?
Microphone.
Thanks very much. Okay, sorry, I'll start that again. Rookie error. Okay, here we go. Well, I wanted to start by paying tribute, actually, and echoing Denise to all of my co-editors, including Claudia, who came into the project a little way after the start and contributed enormously helpful perspectives on DEFA and East German cinema. So I'd like to say a special vote of thanks to you, and also a shout out to Tim Bergfelder, who's hopefully listening out there somewhere from Southampton. Okay, I don't have slides, and I'm going to talk perhaps a little bit more informally. And I'm going to be talking about three things which perhaps might clarify, it might come back to Denise's point about why and indeed how we've set about writing, as it were, another book about national cinema. I think we've made it abundantly clear in the two contributions so far that ours is a book that sets out to, as it were, unpick its own title by interrogating and continually reframing the notion of a national film culture of the German cinema about which the book circulates. I just want to make 3 points that indicate why we still think it's possible. And I think Claudia has just made a very powerful argument as to why it's necessary to keep writing about something or a variety of constellations that we might call German cinema, even while we understand that as a slippery term. And the first reason relates to something that I suppose my mentor, really, the UK Black public intellectual Stuart Hall, the late Stuart Hall, called strategic essentialism. And I want to, so it's sort of a mobilization of the category of the national in a moment where it matters, or of a national cultural tradition in a moment where it matters. And I want to kind of give one anecdote to illustrate that. As Jamie said, I chair the German Screen Studies Network, and we've organized over the past 7 years. We were founded, we founded ourselves, that's myself and my colleague Martin Brady at King's College, together with a group of postgraduates and other UK academics working in German film studies in 2013. And since then, we've run about 70 public events of this kind, of the kind we're involved in tonight, framing and speaking to, contextualizing German language film across a range of different contexts. And there was one occasion a couple of years back when we were collaborating with the Independent Cinema Office, which used to be the sort of BFI, British Film Institute distribution arm, and then has now floated free, but distributes independent cinema to art house cinemas across the UK. And they asked us to help them provide speakers who would be able to speak to films in a retrospective they were launching of the films of Margarete von Trotta, who is, of course, one of the most significant and also better known figures within the new German women's cinema that emerged in the 1970s and 1980s in West Germany. And indeed, whose productions, unlike those of Helke Sander, let's say, or Ulrike Oettinger, or Ulla Stöckel, or other more experimental, formally experimental filmmakers of that generation, Margarete von Trotta's films, at least Hannah Arendt, figures on Netflix, to go back to today's discussion. Okay, so she's one of the better known of that generation. Nonetheless, we found speakers in Bristol, Edinburgh, Cambridge, and so on. But we were really stymied when it came to Belfast in Northern Ireland. And a number of years previously, the German department at Queen's University Belfast had closed down, and there were colleagues there who worked on German language film, but they'd all dispersed, moved into managerial positions, moved away from the university. German was still being taught as a language in the university. There was a huge outcry from across the German studies profession at the time, but nonetheless the department closed down. And it proved impossible, actually, to find anybody the length and breadth of Northern Ireland. And we did try quite a lot. We found some colleagues in the Republic of Ireland who could have spoken but couldn't make it on that evening. So in the end, the ICO flew in somebody from Northumberland, from the north of England, to speak to that film, or to a couple of films by von Trotta. And that seems to me to indicate one of the reasons for publishing a book on German cinema as part of a kind of counterblast to an increasingly insular cultural nationalism that frames cultural debate and film cultural debate in the Anglosphere, both in the digital and virtual worlds. I was looking just before this panel at some audience figures pre-lockdown, pre-COVID, published by the BFI. And in 2018, for example, audience figures for European productions in the UK, according to the BFI, made up 1.1% of UK audiences. And German cinema was a minuscule portion of that. So I do think that I see our volume. I mean, you know, Germany is, let's face it, a big country, and it has a thriving cinema culture. But nonetheless, I see the volume in part as a a counterblast to that kind of insularity, and an attempt to frame a cinema culture which has been important in all sorts of ways, both within Germany and well beyond. An attempt to kind of resituate or to situate that enormously rich film culture in its proper place. And there's a second question then, which is the question of, okay, so let's say you write about a national cinema, so how do you do that? How does one do that? I think you've already got a sense from Claudia and Denise of something of the composition of this volume, the fact that we've kind of broken it up a little bit. We've used different forms of address, different modes of writing. So we've tried to pay attention to questions of address, I suppose, in the volume, and particularly to not addressing this volume purely to academic audiences. There's a section, so we divided up the editorial process amongst the four of us, and I was responsible for a section on theory, memory, and counter cinema, and that starts with a kind of magisterial overview of the history of German language film theory by Tobias Nagel, which sort of starts in the days of early cinema and moves right up to the present day. Many years ago, I started teaching German film more decades ago than I'd like to mention publicly, but nonetheless it was in the 1980s. And at that point, such an overview might well have started not with early cinema, because the scholarship wasn't yet there, not in the sort of richness in which it now exists. But it would certainly have started with Siegfried Kracauer's From Caligari to Hitler from 1947 and Lotte Eisner's The Haunted Screen, two classics of German film studies that look back over the Weimar period and try to both retrieve and pay tribute to this, particularly of Lotte Eisner, a kind of lost cinema culture, a cinema culture that has been interrupted catastrophically by German fascism, but also, in the case of Krakauer, to think about the connections between that cinema and the German catastrophe of the catastrophes of fascism and the Holocaust and genocide against the Jews and other peoples. And it's well known that those books have sort of fallen a little bit, I'm not going to say into disrepute, that's the wrong word, but they've fallen out of vogue, if you like, or at least those elements of them which make some kind of equation between a film culture and what Krakauer calls, using the kind of social psychological framework that he uses in that book, the psychological dispositions of the German people, or Eisner refers to variously as an innate, and she does use that word, German sensibility, or German soul, Germanic soul. So there's an argument in those two books about sort of the proclivity of Germanic peoples or whatever and Eisner makes this argument through Romanticism to various dark moods and scenarios of horror and so on. What our volume does is it sort of places it sidesteps that argument, or it wants to move away from that argument about a sort of essential national culture or national mood or national sensibility, and to think about the sort of ambivalences and ambiguities, both of and the richness also of Weimar film culture. So we look in Chris Horak's chapter, for example, on German comedy, we're looking at the kind of lost utopias of German Jewish film comedy in that period, and the kind of lost traditions that went under. After 1933, we look at the dissident impulses of popular cinema, including the kind of star cult, really, that develops around Asta Nielsen, the Danish star who moves to Germany and makes her career in Weimar Germany, and there's a chapter on her by Heide Schluckmann. So we're looking at the kind of plurality and diversity of Weimar cinema. We're also looking at the ambivalences of fascist film culture. So we have a chapter by Antje Ascheid on exotic stars in Nazi cinema and what they tell us about sort of the peculiarities of a regime that's on the one hand committed apparently to racial purity, but nonetheless many of its most significant icons are sort of exotic transnational divas. And Eric Rentschler adds to that argument in his revisiting of Susan Sontag's fascinating fascism in the volume. So in all sorts of ways, we're sort of moving away from this notion, from the notion that is generally associated with Krakauer and Eisner of a kind of fit between a national psyche, if you like, or a national culture and its cinema. But I think one of the things that I hope the section on theory and counter cinema does is it leads us back into that tradition of writing about cinema, and it does that well, first of all, in terms of the modes of writing that are adopted by both Krakauer and Eisner, who are essayists, journalists, cultural critics, working right through the Weimar period, right in the maelstrom of German culture. Krakauer as editor of the Frankfurter Zeitung, Eisner as a jobbing journalist working for the magazine Filmkurier, so working and editing for them. They have a mode of writing that I've begun to rediscover in work that we're doing in the German Screen Studies Network on Lotte Eisner. And yes, she uses all those terms, German soul, German sensibility, and so on. And with me, they grate a little bit. But if you look at how she's writing, she really is the most extraordinary. First of all, she has the most extraordinary expertise from her long years of working as a journalist. But she's also funny, she's experimental, she has long citations, kind of little kind of visual essays in her volume, The Haunted Screen, for example, which she counterposes with aphoristic comments on the films that she's talking about. She adopts a kind of conversational tone. She addresses the friends and colleagues and collaborators who she worked with during her period in Weimar, Germany. And rereading The Haunted Screen now makes me think of it as something that's absolutely appropriate for rereading in the age of digital visual culture. It's a kind of audiovisual essay of its time, it seems to me. It uses collage, it uses improvisational techniques, it mimics and uses sort of a kind of ekphrastic prose that poetically reproduces the moods and atmospheres of the films it talks about. So it seems to me that, you know, that I suppose this goes back to what Jamie was saying at the beginning about what we've tried to do with the volume. We're trying to investigate, we're not trying to move on some kind of linear trajectory away from the past of German film studies and towards something new, but always, always to be revisiting and rethinking. And just a final point, what I think that involves, and that relates to this event tonight, what I think that also involves is a different kind of engagement, a kind of public humanities engagement, if you like, that all of us are involved in. I was interested, Jamie, that you talked at the beginning about being involved in a film festival yourself, and all of us are involved in curatorial activities through the German Screen Studies Network. That's what I've done with colleagues, some of whom I know are listening in around the UK, to try and adopt not just a mode of writing, but also a kind of engaged cultural practice that brings the work that we're doing in the German cinema book out into the public domain. Just a very last point. Claudia and I co-authored a chapter of the book on feminism and women's cinema. It was a great experience. And one of the things I found myself doing as I was writing was I just wanted to name check. I wanted to name check all the way through. I was desperate not to leave anybody out because, you know, one has a kind of ethical responsibility to, particularly in the context of women practitioners who have been systematically excluded, obliterated from German film history, I just wanted to get them in there. So the lists went on and on and on until I read a recent piece by my colleague Eleanor Gorfinkel from King's College, who published a manifesto against lists in the feminist online journal Another Gaze in 2019. And she writes, lists of films will not save you. Lists of films will not save films. Lists of films will not reorganize how films gain and lose value. Lists will not preserve all those thousands and thousands of films decomposing in alleys, basements, storage lockers, and so on. Lists of films will not write new film histories. Unfortunately, I read that after we'd written the chapter, but I still don't think the chapter is in the end only a list. But what I think Eleanor's piece is a timely challenge. It's a feature of both analog and digital film culture that it's evanescent, it moves, these are moving images, they move with their times. So those of us who are committed, particularly, as I said, I edited the section on theories, memories, and counter cinemas. We had a chapter by Dagmar Bruno on queer cinema. We had a chapter by Mark Silberman on Brechtian cinema, and so on. Those of us who are committed to retaining the memory and the presence of those cinemas have always to work, perhaps going back to what I said originally about Stuart Hall, have always to work strategically, but also collaboratively in the way we've tried to do in the German Screen Studies Network and we're doing tonight, with curators, archivists, programmers, cinephile audiences, but also copyright lawyers, designers of digital platforms, all of those who are creating the landscape of contemporary cinema, both on and offline. And I think all of us are constantly working, as Claudia's presentation and Denise's have already indicated, to preserve in that context some presence for moving images in their most dissident forms. So that's what I hope the German Cinema Book can do.
Thank you, Erica. And before we get to our response, just a reminder that you can post questions on YouTube chat or on Facebook Live. So our response is from Jay Hoberman, who is a cultural critic and film historian based in New York. The author of many books with great titles, so I commend you to Berlin and Beyond's website. He teaches at Columbia University and recently completed a trilogy of books on Hollywood and the Cold War. For 33 years, he was a film critic at the Village Voice. Thanks, Jim.
Thanks very much. Excuse me. And I should say that I very much appreciate following Erica's presentation when she name-checked two exemplary film writers who were professional journalists, and that for me personally, Krakauer is extremely as important, as you can tell from the fact that I wrote 3 books about Hollywood and the Cold War. So I am perpetually in his debt to his example. Now, how I got here on this panel was that Denise and I were both on a panel discussing Pabst Kameradschaft. And afterwards, Denise got in touch with me, told me about this, and asked me would I be here. And I'll just read to you briefly my response when I was invited, because even though I do teach at Columbia and I have been to academic conferences in my life in various capacities, it's not part of my usual, work model, let's say. So, dear Denise, doesn't the respondent comment on and try to sum up what other panelists say? I know something about the reception of the Neue Kino, Fassbinder especially in the US, but that's ancient history. I gave a talk about it at Dartmouth a few years ago, which Erica might have heard. It would probably be depressing to address the limited audience for Ade and Petzold or Fatih Akin in the US. Should we be talking about Berlin Babylon? I watched the first season, but grew tired of it. Your book looks very interesting. And that's before I even, was going through it. And it reminds me that I'm happier dealing with discrete topics than commenting on the unhappy future of film culture. Actually, I kind of see Netflix, let alone the age of Netflix, as a nightmare. So I'm conflicted. I'd like to help out, but don't see a useful spot for me, best Jim. And then Denise got back to me and said, the nightmare of Netflix would be an excellent tack, I think, exclamation point. That would be most useful. You could touch on getting tired of Berlin Babylon, and okay. So here I here I am. And a lot of what's been said, I can only echo in a way. There's a phrase that's attributed to Dwight D. Eisenhower, American president during the Cold War, which is probably apocryphal. I don't think he actually said this, but people understood that he could have, and that was, things are more like they are now than they have ever been before. And I think that's very true. So we have some obvious truths. I mean, I think it's clear that just about every social trend has been accelerated by the pandemic. A global catastrophe, which is likely a foretaste of more global catastrophes to come. And I would say, just parenthetically, something that I was thinking about while I was listening to the presentations, with the emphasis on nationalism. Does it exist? Does it not? I mean, what is the function of nationalism in this global world? I mean, one of the things that's happening is that nationalism seems to have been like incredibly exacerbated, at least on a popular level. Okay, moreover, things will not soon or ever return to the old normal. And I have a 5-year-old grandson who can talk to, oh, remember before the COVID? I mean, it's already, been, had that kind of impact. And so I don't think that will disappear. Everything, as obvious from what we're doing now, is migrating online. So the question is, what is the effect on international film or audiovisual culture? And so some things have been said about that, and there will be more. Let me start first by being personal, and then, excuse me, move on. I think the last movie, sorry. The last movie that I saw on a big screen, projected on a big screen, before the shutdown was Heimat is a Space in Time. And I think that was probably, in many respects, the strongest movie that I'd seen in the past year. I mean, it's also a movie that I could not have begun to be absorbed in if I had not seen it on a big screen. It's just, I would not have had the bandwidth to take this movie in on a TV set or a laptop. It wouldn't have been possible. On the other hand, I probably couldn't have written about it in any intelligent way if I didn't have, a disc to refer to while I was writing. So there you are. I mean, it's a contradictory situation, but I do go back to the idea that sadly, I don't think there's a substitute for projecting movies on a large screen. And this is probably, I'm an old person, so that's what I'm used to, and it's hard to adjust. I mean, for a long time, I refused to review a movie looking, if I didn't see it projected, I didn't want to look at it on a disc. I mean, that, of course, disappeared. I mean, that possibility of not looking at discs now. You can't review something unless you're willing to to stream it. Okay, so from the personal, now I'll go to the local, and that is New York City has been without movie houses since March. I mean, and they're unlikely to open again soon. So that's not even happening here. That possibility doesn't even exist. And from from a commercial perspective, New York, indeed Manhattan, is the single largest and most important market for foreign language films in North America. So if foreign language films are going to continue to be shown here, there's going to have to be another way to do it. Similarly, in terms of film studies, Columbia, where I teach, went remote in the middle of the semester and remains so. And as I think everybody here knows, it's extremely complicated and frustrating to do any sort of film analysis when you're teaching remotely. I noticed also that in terms of film studies, that the journal formerly known as Cinema Studies seems to have just gone online, and that's true of other journals as well. I mean, I was pleased that the piece that I wrote on Thomas Heiss's film was in a Film Comment, the last issue of Film Comment, which was really, with due respect to other North American film magazines, but that was really the only or the last journal in the United States where you could write in a serious manner and get paid for it, if not, an enormous sum, something. So that's gone too, and it's not necessarily a victim of the COVID, but it is a casualty of what's going on in general. So everybody I know is watching television, sometimes movies, but more typically miniseries, or binging on these things, which I think it's different. I mean, I'm not going to say that it's better or worse, but it's different. It's just the way that it is, and I don't see that disappearing so soon either. I mean, the pandemic is terrible for theaters. It's bad for retail businesses, but it's very good for online enterprises. I mean, Amazon is rules the world now, and it is possible to pay a bit more and get your books at a bookstore, but I think that's also that's a kind of a rear guard action, at least in the U.S. So, and Netflix is another Amazon in my view. You have to sort of take what you get. I guess you can go. There are other places where you can go, but it's difficult, and you're dealing with a real colossus there. I mean, it seems ironic, I guess, that Cannes made such a big deal about banning Netflix from competition. I think it was last year, but this year, I think there's a very good chance that Cannes will be online, because that's where film festivals are right now. I mean, and so in a way, that's the Netflixization of festivals, which to me, and this is as a journalist, is actually a greater loss than movie theaters. I mean, for a film journalist, festivals are enormously important. I mean, because that's where you get also the social interaction. I mean, it's fun to watch a movie with an audience, I guess, if they're a well-behaved audience, but it's not necessary. I mean, I could be perfectly happy sitting in an empty theater, and watching a movie, but it's very hard attending a film festival online because you don't have the social intercourse with the other people who are there. And So that is gone. You know, I when I was corresponding with Denise, I mentioned this one inquiry I had made into film release in the United States, the case of Fassbinder, which was very interesting to me because, you know, it was something that I before I was a professional journalist, so I was interested in going back to that and looking at that, and the conclusions that I drew was that at least in New York, Fassbinder became Fassbinder as a result of the intersection of three institutions. One was the New York Film Festival, which was its significance cannot be overestimated in American film culture. The second was the New York Times, which then is now, I mean, and was the kind of cultural arbiter in New York City. And I don't say that because I write from them from time to time now. I was much happier writing for the Village Voice, which was in, you know, a kind of oppositional force. And the third one was New Yorker Films, the least well-known, at least outside of New York, which was an extremely personal, hands-on operation. And I just, you know, don't see something like that existing so easily in the Netflix world. I mean, there is a movie, to name one. I mean, my notes are. There is a movie, but you know, online you don't have the buzz. I mean, I wouldn't know what to look at particularly at movie. I would need some kind of guidance there. And you know, I think of myself as a recovering film critic. I was you know, 33 years more or less weekly at the Village Voice, and there was already a crisis when I lost my job, which I always must say was for being a union organizer. You know, I'm very proud of that's what happened. And this was in January 2012, so it's almost 10 years ago. So I continued to write, but no longer have the responsibility to keep current, being current. I don't have to do that. And how I did that during the years that I was at the Voice was through either directly through film festivals, you know, New York, Berlin, Toronto, Cannes, occasionally someplace else, or indirectly through programmers who went to film festivals and found films there. So, you know, there's a whole system that exists for, you know, creating film culture outside the academy, and I see that as in some ways very, very fragile, or at least dispersed. I mean, you know, as I say, you know, I see what's on Movie and some of these other ones, and it seems interesting, but I don't have an infinite amount of time, so I don't know what it is that I would want to look at, and I don't have the. I guess there is a buzz online, but frankly, I don't know how to navigate that at this point. You know, to use that as a helpful filter. So I do occasionally write about current films. Most recently, the trial of the Chicago 7 and Mank, and I just only this moment realized, oh, those are both Netflix movies. So that must, you know, mean something about how things are getting through. But you know, at least at the New York Times, what I do is I recommend old films, you know, periodically. Sometimes these are German. I mean, they asked me to. They wanted a piece on long movies, they were thinking that, you know, because this is early in the pandemic, back in April, I think, like, what's a long movie? So I said, oh, how about Dr. Mabuse? I wrote about Dr. Mabuse. I don't know if it got people to watch it or not, but that was something I was able to do. Or, you know, somebody put Machen in uniform, that streamed at a New York theater for a week or two. I wrote also about transit not so long ago, but that was something that I would have had to seen at the New York Film Festival to even begin to write about. So I would say that I'm very glad to hear Claudia talk about the availability of films from the DDR. I mean, that to me is very interesting, but it's like, it's interesting for me. I wouldn't know at this point what the possibility could be about writing about that for a larger audience. And so I see that this is a general problem, I feel, with the internet, which is exacerbated by the pandemic. That, you know, things are on the one hand sort of flattened, so that we're having this talk of 3 different continents. I mean, and in real time, and we're able to address each other, but we're not really, you know, able to concretely, you know, have what in the past would have been a real discussion about things. And I think that's the way films get filtered when they're online also. And I don't like to be you know, I don't like to be the voice of gloom, the voice of doom. I'm not a Luddite. It's just, you know, how it appears to me. And, you know, the internet gives and it takes away, but the pandemic is taking even more away, I feel.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. And again, if you have questions for our panel, please submit them on YouTube or Facebook, and they'll be ported over to us. We have a few questions. One, Jethro asks, are you seeing a trend of German directors and producers selecting, making stories, and filming according to Netflix style of distribution? So I guess the question in some ways is the streaming kind of serial model impacting actively film production or media production in Germany?
I don't know, is Berlin Babylon an example of that?
I think it would be, because, you know, as you probably know, it's made by pretty well-known filmmakers. Right?
Yeah.
Tom Tickler, who made Run Lola Run, and Achim von Burius, who also was a filmmaker. I saw his graduation film at the Munich Film Festival, you know, on the top of the film festivals. That's kind of why. And it was a strong film called England. And I think they certainly oriented themselves to this new model. I mean, knowing that this is something that could be potentially distributed worldwide. And I think it is, you know, very well known now. It's maybe the calling card for Germany in this kind of new Netflix world.
I mean, definitely, you know, this new Berlin bureau of Netflix is heavily, you know, licensing and you know, sort of recruiting. So there, you know, there is a incentive there to produce with an eye on streaming. On the other hand, we also have to take into account that, you know, Netflix makes I mean, I wanted to hear more from Netflix about how they make programming decisions and how they select content, right? And it's basically based on algorithms, you know, so they monitor all our viewing habits very carefully, you know, whether we watch movies to the end, and you know, all that is kind of digested by algorithms, and that's how they decide what will be most loved by viewers. So I mean, if I look at the German films available on Netflix, of course, you know, it is a sort of somewhat random selection that we encounter there. Erica?
But I also think we have to be aware of other streaming platforms. I mean, Canopy is an issue because it's not always it's often blocked outside kind of institutional context, as far as I understand it. It's not freely available. And Alice Kino, which is the German sort of German cinema streaming service, is geo-blocked. But there are other other streaming platforms which are trying to make inroads into the landscape. So Arsenal 3, for example, which is an incredibly carefully curated program from the Arsenal Berlin, is, that's been put up and running since the beginning of the pandemic, and I imagine will continue. And that's, I think it's a step on from Mubi, Jim, because the curating involves a lot of kind of material around the films and a very careful programming of retrospectives or thematic programs or sort of author portraits, whatever it might be, of international experimental art house avant-garde film. So I think there are examples of attempts to intervene in this sphere, and Arsenal 3 isn't geo-blocked.
Yeah. Criterion, I would have meant Criterion also is an example of that. Yeah.
But I mean, Jim mentioned something really important. I mean, there is no lack of platforms. In fact, there is an abundance and ever growing. But it's also hard to navigate all that. So I keep forgetting. Was this now on Netflix or Amazon or Mubi or HBO or so and there is no way of except for Google where you can go and look it up. There is no real way of navigating all these various platforms, I find, and that's a challenge for viewers.
I had a question for, I guess, for Jim. It dovetails with this, I think, because it's related to this question of curation, which seems a crucial one. I mean, as there's this radical homogenization of media and this kind of flood of media to which we all have access, maybe curation is more important than ever. In fact, Christian Petzel's producer made that point to me once when I was teaching about film festivals in Europe, and he said, I think festivals are more important than ever because there's just such a massive number of films now. I mean, films are much cheaper to make or can be much cheaper to make. It doesn't mean they're good films, he said, but in a way, festivals serve this important curation function. So I wondered if you had any perspective on the kind of the changing role of the film critic, because you've been involved with two of the most important perches really in film criticism in the US. And critics serve this, I have to say personally, served that important function for me as I was in grad school, et cetera, of kind of curating what the films to see were. And I wonder if that's changed through the internet. And I wonder also, I guess, for the other panelists, if you see that changing in Germany, because there are a couple of important websites now related to German film criticism, I think.
Well, I think that I didn't catch everything that you said, but there's been a general diminishing of authority of film critics, in part because the places where they write have diminished authority, and so there are really only in the U.S. a handful of places, whereas once upon a time every serious magazine had or publication had a film critic. I completely agree about the importance of festivals and programmers. I mean, I've always thought that the whole period that I was a working critic, that I would always thank the programmers at places like a Film Forum and Anthology Film Archives and so on, because I saw them as being on the front lines a lot of the time, to make stuff available. And if you can go to festivals, that would have been the equivalent. So that's I just think that's completely correct. And I had a lot of trouble, participating in the New York Film Festival online. I mean, part of it was it was a difficult time personally, but even so, it was just very hard to schedule these things, to get them in. I mean, and to look at certain films online. And I would just go back to, the fact that I think that's a real loss to not have, to be denied in-person festivals. I don't know if that answers your question, but.
No, thank you. Do the other panelists have any perspectives on maybe online critics in Germany, Erica? You're muted, Erica.
Sorry, not on online critics in Germany. So I had another question or comment. But...
No, go ahead. Yeah, we don't actually have that much time left, so get in and all your comments.
Okay. I just really briefly. I have a close friend who works as a script editor, and whenever I start talking about the dominance of streaming platforms and so on, she sends me back to the BFI statistics, annual statistics page, and she says, look up the figures, audience figures for, as it were, live cinema in the UK. This is the UK, this isn't Germany. And what she tells me is absolutely right, which is that audiences until the pandemic started were rising year on year. And that I'm not saying that that kind of numerical expansion is necessarily a good thing in and of itself, but nonetheless, one of the most steadily growing sectors in so-called live cinema is what's known these days as event cinema. So it's something that's contextualized at festivals or kind of screenings where there's themed sort of dinners attached, those kinds of things. But I mean, so there, I think one of the things that we maybe have to be a little bit careful about, or that perhaps we need to think about, is to think beyond the pandemic. There will be a time beyond the pandemic, and kind of think about, okay, what will come back, what can come back, and is there not going to be? There is already a massive appetite for convivial experience in public space, and that precisely is what cinema offers. So I think it's important not to despair, I suppose, is what I'm saying. I'm just saying that out of the experience that we've had in the German Screen Studies Network, but that all of you will have had curating or addressing or being involved in public events where there's a sense of real urgency about connecting with the questions that difficult cinema asks of audiences, and making, there was a Fassbinder retrospective where the GSSN did a number of events where people wanted to know, was Fassbinder an anarchist? If he wasn't an anarchist, what was he? Why did he make films? Why are his films still important? There's a huge appetite, I think, for those kinds of events where big questions can be asked in a safe and convivial and hospitable environment. And I think that appetite will grow, actually. So it's maybe a note of hope.
No, I hope you're right. I mean, I think it has to do with city life also. I think,
yes.
Extend this to, how it is in New York, with the shutdown of, all sorts of, social existence here, whether that, how that will come back.
But it's also a question that maybe we can kind of work with our students or with our grandchildren or whatever to shape, that's actually something that we have expertise that we can bring to that.
Any closing comments? Is there anything that you would put in the book now? I mean, maybe bracketing the pandemic. If you were going to design the book now, would you include anything that you didn't? I mean, it's a very inclusive book and weighing in at over 600 pages. I undersold it. I called it over 500. But given the changing media landscape, do you think you would include something else or think about anything else differently?
Netflix would be in.
Yeah. Clear enough.
Pandemic films, Nosferatu could get up.
Yes, and there were some chapters that never materialized on documentary, for example. Or, there are definitely, you know, it could never be fully comprehensive, and you know, so it signposts things that are also not there. That's the thing about lists again. I think, you know, it has to be a kind of route map that might also lead to into all sorts of directions that the book itself doesn't go in.
No, I do think that may be one impact of the streaming services. It does seem like documentary is more widely available than it would have been previously, right, on demand. And I think there's a contribution on Faroki, for instance, and all the documentary makers I know in my department, my home department here at Davis, worship Faroki, I have to say. So.
Yeah.
Well, I think we're right at about time. Denise, go ahead. Maybe closing comment, Denise?
Things are ephemeral also, you know, they are there one day and then they disappear again because the license has expired. You know, so that's another challenge to, you know, I guess it's a sort of, you know, selection process. Also books went out of print, and so do these digital versions of movies, but it makes it hard to work sometimes. You know, you want to show something to students and it's no longer there.
Yeah, I think Claudia raised the issue of archives, and I think that, you know, ironically, the internet is probably the biggest archive ever in all of history, but it also raises these issues of what gets remembered and where. So to think about, and that's one of the things I think that the DAFE archives have been great about doing, really promoting cinema from the GDR. So. Well, thank you all so much for participating. That was great. And thanks to Sopan Sorn, the director of the Berlin and Beyond Festival, and to the San Francisco Goethe Institute once again. And congratulations to you all on this wonderful book. It was wonderful to come together and celebrate the publication of a book, I have to say, even remotely, really a great experience. So congratulations again.
Thank you, Jamie, and thank you.
Thank you.
For coming.
Take care. Good seeing you all.
Thank you.